The drive stretched ahead of me like an endless black ribbon, unraveling through the back roads of Virginia. The 2 job interviews waiting for me in Richmond were supposed to be a fresh start, an escape from my dead-end existence. My current job barely covered rent, and the thought of a real career with benefits felt like a fever dream. I had planned to fly, but money was tight, so I opted for the 7-hour drive instead. I left right after my shift, barely stopping by my apartment to grab my suitcase and a thermos of coffee. It was close to midnight now. The roads were deserted, my high beams cutting through the empty expanse of asphalt and pine trees. I was somewhere deep in rural Virginia when exhaustion began setting in. I turned up the radio, hoping the static-laced rock station would keep me alert. My eyes flickered to the clock, 12:17 a.m. I took another sip of coffee, gripping the wheel tighter. Then, something caught my eye. A man stood on the side of the road, barely illuminated by my headlights. He was tall, wearing a black suit with an old-fashioned tie, the kind you'd expect to see in a funeral home. He wasn't walking, wasn't hitchhiking, just standing perfectly still, facing my car. My heart jolted as I passed him. His face was pale, motionless, his eyes locked onto mine. As my car whooshed past, I saw something impossible, his head turning unnaturally to follow me. I let out a shaky breath. I had driven through plenty of weird towns in my life, seen people wandering at night, but something about him sent my nerves into overdrive. The further I got, the more I convinced myself he was just some guy, maybe drunk or lost. But then, 10 minutes later, I saw another figure. Same black suit, same pale face, standing just off the shoulder of the road. A cold, creeping dread spread through my stomach. The stretch of road was straight. There was no way that man could have gotten ahead of me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I slowed down, unsure if I should stop or keep going. But when I glanced at my rearview mirror, he was gone. I hit the gas, my pulse hammering in my ears. This was exhaustion, I told myself. My mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was micro-sleeping, my brain misfiring images. I needed a break. I pulled into the next gas station, a lonely rest stop in the middle of nowhere, the kind where the fluorescent lights buzz too loudly and the air smells like burnt coffee and engine grease. I parked near the entrance, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the unease. That's when I saw him again. The man in the suit stood beneath a flickering street lamp in the lot, his body eerily still, his empty gaze locked onto me. My chest seized. This time, I could see his features more clearly, sharp cheekbones, thin lips, a face that looked eerily out of place. Something was off about his proportions, like he was stretched just a little too long, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. I wasn't imagining this. I fumbled for my keys, jammed them into the ignition, and sped out of the lot without looking back. My hands were slick on the wheel, my breath short and panicked. I had an hour left to drive, but my body was shutting down. I needed to sleep. I found a vacant motel just off the highway, a flickering neon sign reading Horizon and $40/night. The parking lot was nearly empty except for 2 cars. It looked like the kind of place that saw more drifters than actual travelers, but at this point, I didn't care. I just needed to close my eyes for a while. The man at the desk barely looked up as I handed him cash. "Room 107, he muttered, sliding the key across the counter. I took it and hurried out. The night air was thick and humid, clinging to my skin like damp cloth. My room was at the far end of the lot, past a dimly lit vending machine and a row of rusted metal chairs. As I unlocked the door, I felt it again, that horrible, crawling sensation. I turned slowly, afraid of what I'd see. Across the lot, beneath the motel's flickering sign, he was there. The man in the suit. Watching. Waiting. A lump of ice formed in my throat. I stepped inside, locked the door, and double-checked the windows. My breathing was shallow as I backed away from the entrance. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I forced myself to calm down. It had to be a coincidence. A trick of exhaustion. The room smelled like old carpet and mildew, but I barely noticed. I collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, my limbs aching from the drive. I just needed to sleep. That was all. And yet, as my eyelids grew heavy, a soft noise made them snap open again. A slow, deliberate tap-tap-tap against the window. I sat up, my body rigid with terror. The curtains were drawn, but the shadow behind them was unmistakable. He was standing right outside. Still, waiting. I forced myself to move, to reach for my phone, but my fingers felt numb. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I didn't breathe, didn't move. And then, the doorknob turned. It didn't rattle, didn't jerk violently. It just turned, slowly, methodically. like someone already knew I was awake. I swallowed a scream. I reached for my car keys, gripping them tight. If I had to run, I would. If I had to fight, I'd do that too. But before I could move, the door unlocked, and the lights in my room flickered out. The darkness swallowed the room whole. The tiny green glow from the alarm clock was the only thing breaking through the suffocating blackness. I gripped my car keys like a weapon, my breath locked in my chest. The door had unlocked. The lights had gone out, but no one had entered. The silence was unbearable. Then the door creaked open. Not all the way, just enough for me to see the sliver of the hallway beyond it. My pulse thundered as I stared at the void of the opening, expecting anything to emerge. I reached for my phone with a trembling hand, trying to turn on the flashlight. My fingers fumbled, slick with sweat, as I raised the screen toward the door. The beam cut through the darkness. The hallway was empty, but something wasn't right. The air smelled different, metallic, like earth and decay. I swallowed hard. Was someone inside already? A noise cut through the silence, a wet, dragging sound. Not from the hallway, from the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. I hadn't gone inside. I hadn't even turned the light on in there. But I could hear it now, a damp, slithering movement, like something crawling. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to grab my bag and get the hell out. But my body wouldn't move. Then I saw it. A shadow shifting behind the frosted glass of the shower door. Not a person. Something wrong. Its shape was uneven, jerking, as though struggling to fit within the human form. My chest caved inward. The rational part of my brain refused to believe what I was seeing. This wasn't real. This was stress, exhaustion, a trick of my mind. And then it moved, slowly, pressing up against the glass. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the bathroom door slammed shut. I bolted, ripped the motel door open, and stumbled into the parking lot, my lungs burning. The humid night air felt like freedom. I turned toward my car, ready to throw myself inside, to floor it until I hit daylight. But then, I stopped. The parking lot wasn't empty anymore. There were 3 figures standing there, all wearing black suits, all staring at me. My stomach dropped. I wasn't hallucinating this. I wasn't crazy. I turned, gasping, about to sprint. And I collided with someone standing right behind me. A strong, cold grip clamped onto my wrist. I looked up and froze. It was me, a perfect replica of myself. Same face, same clothes, but something in its expression was wrong. Its mouth twitched, forming a distorted version of my own exhausted, terrified face. Then it spoke. "You don't belong here anymore." I tore away from its grasp, scrambling backward, my ankle twisting. The figures in the parking lot stepped closer. The motel lights flickered again, and for the briefest second, I saw their faces. They weren't human. Their skin was stretched too tight. Their mouths weren't mouths at all, but wide, vertical slits. Their eyes were black, bottomless voids, not reflecting any light. And yet, they still wore those black suits. Like something failing to appear human. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran. Threw myself into my car, locking the doors in one frantic motion. My hands trembled as I jammed the key into the ignition, but it wouldn't start. The figures were moving toward me. I slammed my hand on the steering wheel, a broken sob choking out at me. The car wouldn't start. Then my reflection in the rearview mirror shifted. It wasn't me anymore. The thing that had grabbed me was sitting in the back seat. Its lips curled into something too wide, too unnatural. "Go home," it whispered. Then everything went black. I woke up to the sound of knocking. Daylight streamed through the windshield. My head throbbed. I blinked, my vision swimming, and turned toward the noise. A uniformed police officer stood outside my car, tapping the window. I scrambled upright, disoriented. The parking lot was empty. The motel looked abandoned. The neon sign was shattered, vines creeping up the walls. I rolled down the window with stiff fingers. "You all right, sir?" the officer asked. "You've been parked here all night. This place has been closed for years." My stomach twisted. "What?" "Yeah, it shut down after some disappearances a while back. Whole place condemned." "You sure you weren't drinking?" I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel. I wanted to argue, to tell him I had booked a room, had spoken to the desk clerk, had seen them. But something stopped me. I looked down at my hands. There was something clutched between my fingers. A motel key. Room 107. I turned it over. There was no logo, no name. Just one thing, scratched into the cheap plastic. "Go home." I didn't argue with the cop. I didn't say another word. I just drove. And as I pulled onto the highway, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white, I saw a black sedan in my rearview mirror. The driver? Wearing a black suit. Watching. Waiting. Story 2. It was supposed to be a peaceful drive home. I had taken the back roads through Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, to avoid the late-night highway traffic. I'd done it plenty of times before. There was something comforting about the isolation, the winding roads cutting through endless stretches of forest. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional static from the radio. Then, my dashboard beeped. Low fuel. I sighed, pulling up my Maps app to find the nearest gas station. There was one about 5 miles ahead, tucked along a dark stretch of road with nothing but trees on either side. I almost missed it, just a small, flickering sign above a tiny convenience store, the kind that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I pulled in and saw only one other car, a rusted pickup truck at the far end of the lot. The station was empty except for a single pump and a dimly lit shop window. I parked, grabbed my wallet, and stepped out, inhaling the crisp night air. Then I noticed him. A man stood at the pump beside his pickup truck, holding the nozzle but not actually filling his tank. He was just staring at me. I gave a quick nod and walked into the store, my pulse quickening. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and dust. A bored-looking cashier barely glanced up as I grabbed a bottled water and paid for my gas. When I stepped back outside, the pickup truck was gone. I exhaled, relieved, and walked to my car. But then I froze. Something wasn't right. The pump was still there, still connected to the same fueling station, but the hose was gone. I looked down. It lay on the ground, the metal nozzle snapped clean off, the jagged edges gleaming in the dim light, like it had been ripped. I swallowed hard, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. I hurriedly unscrewed my gas cap and started filling my tank, as darting around the empty lot. The wind rustled the trees beyond the pavement, whispering through the darkness. Then, the sound of an engine. Low, rumbling, just behind me. I spun around, my breath catching. The pickup truck sat at the edge of the lot, just past the glow of the street lamp. The engine was on, but the headlights were off. I couldn't see inside. A shiver ran through me. I turned back to my car, forcing myself to act normal, to finish fueling up as quickly as possible. My fingers fumbled with the gas cap. A crunch of gravel. Footsteps. I didn't dare turn around. I yanked the nozzle free, practically throwing myself into the driver's seat. My hand shook as I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine coughed. Didn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. My heart pounded against my ribs as I gripped the wheel. This wasn't happening. My car had been fine. There was no reason. A tap. A slow, deliberate tap against my driver's side window. I turned my head. The man from the pickup truck stood there, grinning. His eyes were too wide, too bright in the dark. His lips stretched unnaturally, like his face wasn't meant to smile that way. I locked the doors instinctively, my breath shallow. He leaned closer, pressed his forehead to the glass. His grin never wavered. Then he opened his mouth, but instead of speaking, he exhaled. The window fogged with his breath, and in the condensation, he wrote something with his finger. One word. Run. My blood ran cold. I turned the key again, praying, begging. The car roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I floored the gas pedal, tires screeching against the pavement as I tore out of the station. My heart slammed against my chest, my entire body trembling. I checked my rearview mirror. He was gone. The gas station, the pickup truck, the man vanished, as if they had never been there. I kept driving. I didn't care how far, how fast. I just needed to put distance between me and whatever the hell had just happened. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. I exhaled, trying to calm myself. Maybe it had been some kind of sick joke. Maybe I was imagining things. Then, after a few minutes, my dashboard dinged. A new warning light flashed. Tire pressure low. My breath hitched. I slowed down, listening. A soft, rhythmic wobbling sound came from my rear wheel. I already knew what I would find before I even pulled over. The rear tire completely flat. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. I was being hunted. A low rumble filled the air. Not thunder. An engine. From somewhere in the trees. I turned my head, scanning the dark woods beside the road. Then, just barely visible between the trees. Headlights. Motionless. Watching. The headlights between the trees didn't move. Neither did I. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel, my pulse hammering against my temples. The engine in the woods was running low, steady, waiting. I had to think. Fast. I grabbed my phone, my thumb swiping over the screen, trying to dial 911. No signal. I swore under my breath. Of course. Of course I had no service in the middle of nowhere. I tried to calm my breathing, to convince myself this was just some prank, some local messing with out-of-towners for fun. But my gut told me something else. I reached for the glove compartment, fumbling for the small pocket knife I kept there. Not much, but better than nothing. I took a deep breath, pushing my door open as quietly as I could. The air outside was thick, humid, suffocating. The tire was completely shredded, not slashed, torn apart, like something had sunk claws into it and ripped. I swallowed hard, glancing back toward the trees. The headlights were gone. I felt a chill snake up my spine. I hadn't heard the engine shut off, hadn't heard it move. It had just disappeared. That was worse. Much worse. I reached into the trunk, grabbing the emergency jack and spare tire, my movements jerky and rushed. I needed to change this tire now, get out of here before. Crunch. A footstep. Close. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The sound had come from behind the car, right near the tree line. I didn't look, didn't turn. If I looked, I knew I'd see something I didn't want to see. I kept working, my fingers fumbling with the jack, my breath shallow. Just get the tire on. Just get out of here. Then, a hand slammed down on my shoulder. I didn't think. I spun, swinging the tire iron as hard as I could. It connected with something. A wet, cracking sound split the night as the impact sent me stumbling backward. The man was right there. The same one from the gas station. But his face was wrong. The features had shifted, stretched in ways that shouldn't have been possible. His jaw hung too low, his eyes were deep black voids, his skin rippling like something was moving beneath it. He should have gone down, should have reacted, but he didn't. He just stood there, smiling. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. He tilted his head, and then he spoke, but it wasn't a voice. It was a chorus, like multiple voices whispering, layered over one another. You're not supposed to be here. My stomach twisted. I turned and ran. Forget the car. Forget the tire. I bolted into the trees, branches whipping at my face, my breath burning in my lungs. I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The woods were suffocatingly silent. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just my own footsteps. And then, more footsteps. Behind me, matching my pace exactly. I ran harder, my legs screaming, my lungs on fire. The trees around me blurred as I pushed forward, deeper into the darkness. I couldn't hear him breathing, couldn't hear him running, just the sound of his footsteps perfectly mirroring mine. Then the ground vanished. I fell, tumbling down a steep slope, branches and rocks tearing at my clothes, my body rolling, twisting, pain flashing through me. I hit the bottom hard. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then I opened my eyes and saw the road. I had fallen right back onto the stretch of asphalt where my car was. Impossible. I had run miles. I staggered to my feet, vision swimming. My car sat just where I had left it, the shredded tire still useless, the trunk still open. And he was standing beside it, waiting. His head slowly tilted too far to the side, his grin widening too much. I took a step backward, my mind screaming at me to wake up, to stop whatever this was. The headlights in the trees came back. 2, 4, 8. A dozen pairs of headlights flickered to life within the tree line, their beams breaking through the darkness like hungry eyes. Engines rumbled, and in the glow of those headlights, I saw more of them. Men, standing still, smiling, wearing old, ill-fitting suits, like shadows wearing human skin. I ran, didn't think, didn't breathe, just ran, but no matter where I went, I always ended up back at the road. The cars in the woods never moved. The men in suits never chased me. They just watched, smiling, waiting. I don't remember how I got away. The next thing I knew, I was waking up inside my car. The tire was fine. My gas tank was full. My phone had signal again. I checked the time. 4 hours had passed. I was parked outside a different gas station, miles from where I had been. I stumbled inside, pale and shaking, and asked the clerk where I was. He gave me a strange look. You pulled in here about 20 minutes ago, he said. Sat in your car the whole time. I didn't argue. Didn't say anything. I just got back on the road and never took the back roads again. But sometimes, when I drive at night, I still see headlights in the trees. Waiting. Watching. Story 3. The drive up to see Todd was supposed to be simple. I'd done it plenty of times before, 6 hours on the highway, a few pit stops along the way, and I'd be at his place before midnight. But winter had other plans. The snow started falling heavier than expected, and by the time I reached the outskirts of his town, the roads were near impossible to drive on. I pulled into a small diner off the highway to wait it out. The place had that old-school feel: vinyl booths, neon lights buzzing faintly overhead, the air thick with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. A waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, poured me a cup of coffee without asking. "Storm's just getting started," she said. "Best find a place for the night." I nodded, checking my phone. No signal. Great. A man at the bar turned toward me, a lazy grin on his face. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a heavy coat that looked a little too clean, like he wasn't really from around here. "There's a motel just up the road," he said. "Cheap, warm, and got plenty of vacancies tonight." I hesitated. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right. The waitress shot him a glance but said nothing. Still, I wasn't about to drive through a blizzard. I thanked him, paid for my coffee, and headed out into the cold. The motel was exactly 5 minutes away, just like he'd said. A single-story building, its neon sign flickering. Pinewood Motel vacancy. I parked, grabbed my bag, and hurried inside. The front desk clerk barely looked at me as he slid a key across the counter. "Room 104, he muttered. I nodded and stepped back outside, my boots crunching in the thickening snow. My car was already covered in a layer of white. But something else caught my attention. Across the lot, under the yellow glow of the street lamp. The man from the diner. He was standing beside his truck, just watching me. My stomach knotted. I quickly unlocked my door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The room was small, outdated, peeling wallpaper, a stiff-looking bed, a small TV on a wooden dresser. I threw my bag onto the chair and exhaled, trying to shake the unease. The blizzard howled outside. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal. I sighed and peeled off my coat, figuring I'd get some rest. Todd would understand if I showed up in the morning instead. I was just about to turn off the lights when I noticed something wrong. The bathroom door. It was shut. I hadn't used it yet. And yet, there was water pooling out from underneath. My breath hitched. I took a slow step forward, heart pounding, reaching for the doorknob. The knob was wet. I yanked my hand back instinctively, my mind racing. The room had been locked when I got in. No one else should have been here. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to turn the handle. The door creaked open. The bathroom was empty. No dripping faucet. No running water. But the sink was full, filled to the brim with dark, stagnant water. And in the reflection of the mirror, the man from the diner was standing behind me. My breath caught in my throat. The man from the diner stood right behind me in the mirror's reflection, his face obscured by shadows, his lips curved into the faintest smirk. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. No one was there. The bathroom was empty. The only sound was the slow, deliberate drip, drip, drip from the faucet. I backed out of the bathroom, every inch of my body screaming that I should run. Get my keys, get in my car, and get the hell out of here. But when I glanced at the window, my car was gone. My pulse turned into a drumbeat in my skull. I ran to the door, flung it open. The parking lot was empty. Snow swirled in the air, erasing everything in sight. The neon motel sign flickered weakly through the storm, casting a pale, sickly light over the deserted pavement. I knew where I had parked. I knew my car had been right there. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut, trying to slow my breathing. Think. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal. Not even Wi-Fi. Nothing. I had to find the motel clerk. Maybe he knew something. Maybe there was a landline. I grabbed my coat, forcing myself to move, forcing my legs to carry me back through the freezing night. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I made my way to the front office, my breath visible in the icy air. The front desk was empty. The motel clerk was gone. The old rotary phone on the counter sat off the hook. The receiver dangled limply from the cord, like someone had left in a hurry. A draft blew through the room. I turned, scanning the dimly lit lobby. The only sound was the wind howling against the windows. Then I saw it. The door to the back office was open. Just a crack. I stepped closer, swallowing hard. Something was off about the way the door hung open, like it had been left that way on purpose. I pushed it wider. The room was dark, but in the faint glow from the hallway, I could make out papers scattered across the desk. Old motel records, yellowed and curling at the edges, and pinned to the wall behind the desk. Dozens of Polaroid photos. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. Every single one was a picture of a guest. Men, women, couples, smiling at the front desk, standing outside their rooms, some inside their cars. All taken right here. But as I scanned the faces, my stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. The last photo on the board was of me, standing at the front desk, holding my motel key. My skin went cold. I grabbed the picture, my fingers trembling. It was impossible. I had just checked in. Who took this? A sound cut through the silence. Not from inside the office. From outside. A slow, deliberate knocking at the front door. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. The glass pane in the front door was fogged up from the cold, but through the condensation, I could make out the blurry shape of someone standing outside. Tall, motionless. Then, as I watched it, they leaned forward and pressed their forehead to the glass. I choked back a scream. The man from the diner. I could see his mouth moving, whispering something. I took a step back, my whole body screaming to get away, but then, all the lights in the motel went out. Darkness swallowed the room. The only illumination came from the weak glow of the neon sign outside, flickering dimly through the storm. And then, the door to the back office slammed shut behind me. I whirled around, shoving at the handle, locked, trapped. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I fumbled in the dark, my hands sliding over the desk, knocking over papers, searching for anything to use. A noise crept through the darkness. Slow, wet, like something dragging itself across the floor. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Something was in here with me. I backed away, feeling the wall behind me, my fingers scrambling over the plaster. The air was thick, damp, wrong. And then, something brushed against my ankle. I screamed. I didn't care anymore. I threw my full weight against the door, slamming my shoulder into it over and over until it burst open. I stumbled forward, hitting the floor hard. The front lobby was empty. The motel was silent, except for the sound of something crawling out of the back office. I ran. I didn't stop. Didn't turn around. I shoved open the front doors and sprinted into the freezing night, the snow stinging my face, my lungs burning from the cold. The parking lot was still empty. No cars. No tracks in the snow. The entire motel felt abandoned. But I kept running. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near the edge of the road. My hands dug into the snow, my breath ragged, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. And then, a car. Headlights cut through the storm, approaching fast. I staggered to my feet, waving frantically. The car slowed. A beat-up sedan. Familiar. Too familiar. It was my car. My stomach twisted as the driver's side window rolled down. A man sat in the driver's seat. And it was me. My own face, staring back at me. But it wasn't right. His skin was too pale, his smile too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. I stood frozen, the wind roaring around me. The thing wearing my face tilted its head, watching me. Then it spoke, in my own voice, flat, wrong, layered with something else underneath. "Your room is ready." I turned and ran into the woods. I didn't stop running until the motel's neon sign was gone, until the road was a distant memory. Somehow, I made it to Todd's house. I don't remember how I got there. I don't remember the drive. But when I looked in the mirror that night, I saw a Polaroid pinned to my jacket. A photo of me, standing outside room 104, with the motel clerk and the diner man grinning beside me, like I had been part of this place all along.